You're listening to BioInsights, and welcome back to the show. Today's show is a little bit more about exercise science and how it meets commercial reality. This is something that I've really been giving, a lot of thought to because we're going to go deep into an under-leveraged tool in business today, and I feel like I think it's testing, specifically metabolic testing. So for gym owners, trainers, coaches that look at a metabolic cart as an expensive lab piece of equipment for either athletes, that's an assumption that really is costing them revenue, retention, and results. So my guest is returning back for his second episode. He spent 25 years in the intersection of physiological testing specifically, respiratory training, and then real world performance. He's worked with Olympic athletes, military operators, and everyday clients. And he's really built a system that helps coaches operationalize data in a commercial setting. So welcome back to the show, Daniel. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Marcelo. I appreciate being back, and it's a very interesting topic. I don't hear very many people talking about this at all.
No, I mean, I think gym owners specifically, or let's say sports and conditioning owners of academies, don't test enough because they don't, it holds people accountable, or we have to ask ourselves a hard question like, does the program, is it a one size fits all, or am I really individualizing my programming and then allowing them to participate effectively in a group session? So
Absolutely.
it really, so for most trainers that still see a metabolic cart like lab gear for elite athletes, what should a small or mid-sized studio care about this right now?
Well, I mean, if you look at what they can apply exercise and or nutrition. Those are the two big hitters that they have at their disposal. It will help them make all the best decisions to improve their customers' health, longevity, or performance through the use of individualized exercise and nutrition programming. In other words, I couldn't do my job. I couldn't prescribe exercise and nutrition without having the baseline information that I get from metabolic analysis, telling me what the systemic limitations are, as well, and therefore what I need to focus on, as well as accurately zoning. That's the other thing that, if you can't prescribe in the right intensities, then you could actually not only make them not better, but you can actually make them worse.
And I think I want to add a little color to this. Um, I want to basically share a little bit of my data so people get to see this in an applied practice, right? Um, what we're referring to is testing allows to create target zones that you're referring to, heart rate target zones. Um, by default, today it's age predicted, and we can get into that, by the way. But then they make this assumption of how many calories I'm expending from carbs, proteins, and fat. So I share this to add a little bit of color to, again, the information of that we're collecting today is more or less this. So, by sharing or by using this visual, this is post processing, this is live monitoring. What are gym owners, like if the trainer is still doesn't see the metabolic cart as like right now, do you feel like effectively age-based is good enough?
No. I mean, I understand why people do it. But the fact is that we know that, for example, the caloric burn and the fat and carbohydrates ridiculous trying to get it off of a watch. Potentially caloric is plus or minus 30%. So it's an attempt and a realization that this data is important, but not understanding that you have access to the gold standard methodology through the use of metabolic analysis. In particular, and this is really important to differentiate for those who wish to get tested, make sure you get tested on a device that has O2 and CO2 sensors. Otherwise, you cannot measure fat and carbohydrate. So why that's important is the fact that, of course, it's one of the best metrics to determine your metabolic health, but also to be able to transfer that information, accurate information, into whatever device that you're using. So, if you do a VO2 max test and we get the accurate carbs and fats, for example, at KORR, you can import your Garmin data and it will change it to be accurate according to your actual test results within our app. And it's a huge amount of difference. Caloric can be off by 250 to 500 calories per workout. I mean, yeah.
That's the difference of proper nutrition, because nutrition improves performance.
Well, they wonder why they're not losing weight, despite the fact that because their watch is telling them they're using 580 calories, they're actually using 240.
But I can have that data.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really not up to the consumer. The consumer's choice in the matter is if I get tested and where do I get tested? Because they're two different things. A consumer just can't go out there and say, well, I'm going to go for physiological testing without knowing what information the device collects that they're using, the quality of the protocols, the degree of the analysis, and then the application to exercise prescription. There's lots of people who are doing metabolic analysis that are still using just standardized workouts. They don't individualize at all. They don't take the data and use it. So it's really important for the consumer to do some research and select the best place to be tested as well.
The challenge too is that this technology now is more available than it is available today compared to our past in more locations. Still not enough, in my opinion. But I feel like from a business standpoint, implementing testing well, I mean, my experience is the top two or three expectations really is member engagement, member retention, but also like if people are seeing results and feeling results, you're going to get more of a lifetime value in your business out of a member or out of a client that you're working with. What are some of the, I guess, like what are you talked about more or less the testing is good, there's better, but then there's the best, and that's CPET. Can you define that so people understand what's the difference between that and like a step test, and like we talked about age predicted step test or time trial? Those are kind of good, better, best, right? Algorithm, margin of error, large, step test or let's say 1.5 mile run. There is better data, but then the best data is CPET and why a metabolic cart that again takes CO2 and O2. I'm not talking about ventilation, deflection, because I've done a lot of flow meters, not really meters that I mean I've taken gas analysis where it's taken that feedback, but the challenge has always been calibration, and you used to always need big tanks. So I kind of gave you a big picture there.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it.
And I'll start talking about it. If I missed a portion of that very broad question, let me know when I finish. Yes, for the consumer and for the businesses who are considering adding testing, it's very complicated out there right now. And of course, business owners need to look at it from a ROI point of view. if they can afford the investment in the first place, then they need to look at ROI. And it's not just the ROI for doing the testing, but like you said, it's for client retention as well. The fact that you run, for example, a science-based individualized training programs and nutrition programs, and that everybody has to have this testing in order for you to be able to know exactly what you need to be able to do, which is true. They'll pay you more to come to your place. Retention wise, what works well is, sure, their outputs may change. So for example, they may be able to do more work, however it wants to be measured, whether it's wattage or speed or whatever. But you don't know why. You don't know what changed to improve that. You don't know whether it's just simply neuromuscular coordination. With our device, you can see which physiological systems have responded to the training and how. And you can then identify perhaps what you're going to concentrate on next. So that's very impressive to clients. To them, they want to be able to see the outputs change, but they also want to be able to see from their first test to their second test how their physiology is improved. And then what you could do at that point is you can identify, for example, if they had a cardiovascular limitation which has improved significantly with the training that you prescribe based upon the initial findings, you can demonstrate that now your biggest limiter is respiratory, and therefore over the next 12 to 16 weeks we're going to work on respiratory. And then of course their outputs will continue to improve because their physiology improves. Yeah. And you're concentrating your training on the limiting factor. So whether now that's the gold standard, it's not for athletes. It's for all human beings. People say who should do this, and I said, well, just don't put a pig on it. It's outstanding for every. If it's a medical client, so I work medical, general, and athletic populations. In fact, that's what's made me extremely good in analysis, is the fact of having to look at people who are on medications or who have a abnormal physiology, let's say secondary to diabetes or metabolic syndrome. Their physiology will not respond in the same way. That's the whole idea of them being ill. But you can look at their particular outputs and be able to prescribe very specific programming for them. And it's drastically, the training is always the same. It's the funny part. I mean, you have a choice of doing long, slow stuff, intermediate stuff, or high intensity stuff, and you have to prioritize on that. But each of those pockets of exercise training should be applied very specifically at the right intensities. I keep going back to zones. Probably the biggest mistake that I see out there is incorrect zoning. And that's
when you say zones, the two models are typically 3-zone or 5-zone, right?
There is no zone. This is lactate bullshit. They see it as being, they see. I just saw this week was sort of like, oh, aren't we great? We can identify 3 zones. You're going, no, that's the weakness of the device and the data. Yeah. You can identify 3 zones. The fact is that and I keep drawing everybody back to the same thing, zones should be based upon which substrate system is contributing the most to ATP production at that effort. That's zones.
And that's RER value, right? Basically so you're seeing those sinusoidal waveforms that I had before. You saw a heart rate and it drifts, but then how you're intaking oxygen and fat, and then there's a point that it actually crosses and overlaps. Can you talk about how you differentiate aerobic and anaerobic, and why it's important to actually look at those fuel substrates?
Yeah.
Because that's what identifies training outcomes, right? And training dose.
Correct. So essentially, you've got major fat contribution. So that's what we would use is things like fat max. So where's the point? At what heart rate do you use the max amount of fat with the least amount of carbohydrate? Everybody screws this up and uses the maximum amount of fat. Going, no, I know it's called fat max, but it's the maximum ratio between the fat being utilized and the carbohydrate being utilized. That represents well zone 1. Why? Because your oxygen delivery is far exceeding your oxygen utilization, and that is recovery. So you've always got to look at it from the operator's point of view as well. For them, they know that's recovery. Why is it recovery? They don't know. And how do you find it? And they don't know. And frankly, half the operators of CPETs don't know this either. They just follow the algorithms that come in their software. Zone 2 is a contribution from both fat and carbohydrate, but a majority is fat. And what it represents is those first two are considered aerobic zones, which I just, I hate using that. It's just, everything's aerobic. Everything uses oxygen. It's ridiculous.
Well, it's predominantly using a fuel substrate that is fat or sugar. Um, well, no, excuse me. I take that back. You're when you're burning more sugar, it's considered to be anaerobic, right?
Right.
Or,
Despite the fact that
but
you're using more oxygen, and anaerobic means no oxygen. So
and,
it,
but the point is, I think people always want to make it one dimensional, and I think we said this in our previous conversation. All the fuels you're using everything at the same time. There's just I would say a percentage increase in a category that's reflected based upon the stress state that you're in, and it could be you brought up diabetes. Certain people at rest use fuel substrates very differently,
yeah.
and that's what makes them. That could be detected too, and that's why I think today it's even more important because you're getting people coming to a facility. About 25% of the population now has some sort of wearable, but like, what are we doing with that engagement? And I think metabolic testing is a no-brainer because, to your point, if I have a community that might be on a GLP-1, that might be on a hormone, that might have some type of comorbidity, metabolic syndrome, like you're talking. So it allows me to be able to make sure that they get the best member experience, and really that's something that that's meaningful. Like, take for example, like someone that's a 40-year-old recreational client that's guest that is he wants to do zone training. I know you hate that term. Probably so I won't use it too many times.
No,
But
honestly, I don't mind zone training. I just hate the fact that people don't understand what zones represent. Yes, there's two representations. From the science point of view, it's a change in substrate based upon ATP production rates. That's it.
yeah,
We've got to make this clear to everybody. There is no other definition. The application of it is that this is, for example, some people will think high intensity training, like HIIT, is zone 5. It is, but nobody does HIIT at zone 5. But HIIT should be there because that's what zone 5 represents. 4 is kind of a longer intervals. 3 is tempo. 2 is more endurance style, and 1 is recovery. Those are helpful for the client to know this. So when you explain the workouts related to what they need to know, they understand that. But it's the people that are defying, the lactate people are saying that there's 3 zones. There's only 3 zones to them because it's based upon the limitation of the data. And the zones represent things they can find. So what? That is not what zones are supposed to be. And that's what drives me crazy about zones. But I do agree that it's a very good applicable method for the client to be able to use that information.
Yeah, and I think that really is the change of perspective is to align the zone-based data with the fuel utilization because then they could, if there's a training goal outcome, like let's see for a race, we can then dial that in and make them understand that in this area, if you can, we got to refine your fuel utilization because there might, we've in this gap here, as far as how effectively you're using oxygen compared to, the rest of the category. That's specifically important for, let's say, a cyclist or a runner. Can you talk a little bit about that training outcome and why it's even more meaningful in that application?
Yeah. When it comes to zones, there's kind of a third thing that people, you kind of have to think of this as a, you define your zones using CPAP with O2 and CO2. To you, then, the exercise prescription is based upon matching the limiter to the appropriate intensity. And so we know that zone 2 and zone 5 are the best methods for increasing mitochondrial density and capillarization in relation to a metabolic limitation. And we know that zone 3 and zone 4 are the best methods for increasing cardiovascular health. So if you want to increase somebody's VO2 max, people will say, well, you need to do zone 2. And you're going, no. Zone 2 will allow you to do it over and over again. But it's 3 and 4 that changes those. And it's a combination of the intensity and the appropriate load, like you're talking about. How long for how many repetitions? What's the work to rest ratio? Those are the kind of functional application of the findings. So you're using the limiter and you're using the zones together to be able to prescribe the programming. And this is where, it goes back to your first statement is how do you do that when you don't know any of this at a gym level? And the chances are if you bring enough people that are severely deconditioned, you can just get them to pick their nose 5 times a day, they get better, But are they spending their time in the right way to get the most effective and efficient changes in their health?
I think I agree with you 100%. I think putting on a recent discussion I had with an operator, his comment was, "Well, I don't have the staffing to be able to do this, so the operational cost, right, to do it as well. It's like I got to hire someone. I need a special tech. Have the protocols and the technology gotten better? Because I imagine that's we're on that precipice. Not that it's going to replace a physiologist like yourself or a specialist like yourself, or I like to consider that's just going to be a co-pilot that's going to help you be able to take in tons of data and be able to see things that would have taken you a little bit longer to take a look at."
Yes, they're all over the place right now. The problem is, I could think of there's a particular lactate guy who's you just basically punch in your lactate and he says, "So I'll tell you your VO2 max, I'll tell you your zones," and you're going, you can't. That's a lie, a flat out lie to the public. And I'm getting fed up with it, to tell you the truth. Maybe I'm just getting older and I'm tired of it. And maybe this is round 3 of the same discussion over 30 years. But you have to be super careful about, if you want physiology to be simple, I'm sorry, it's not. It's a straight out statement. Every company, for example, like, Cosmed, KORR, everybody has analysis systems built in. The trick is how much control do they give the individual to be able to change or adapt their choices on the analysis based upon the test. So, a lot of people will think that, most people would say anaerobic threshold is the best method of zoning. And you're going, I'm sorry, I've been in this game for 30 years. Anaerobic threshold is never wrong. You know what I mean? If the calculations are right and the data's there, it will identify it. But you're taking 20 minutes of data to look at one place to multiply it by percentages. That's not a good way of going. And they're wrong most of the time. It doesn't mean the data is wrong. It doesn't mean the device is bad. It doesn't mean the algorithm's wrong. They're doing exactly what the algorithm is supposed to do. It is identifying a certain point. The fact is that that's not how the human body works. And there's too many other variables, especially when you're looking at physiology. One particular systemic limitation can profoundly affect another. So I'm sorry, it is complex. Do you need to? Is there ways of doing this more easily? Well, really, most people want more efficiently, right? That's what they want. They want some glitzy report that they can give their clients to impress them. But
or be able to help them, right? Because it's like there has to be a practical trade-off, like some type of like a hybrid billing model, right? I can book for 30 minutes of an assessment and then 15-minute follow-up review with them. Like what does it look like? Do I need to be doing, what's your go-to, if you can give us an example of a protocol that you would do with general pop, and how does that look like from intake to service and onboarding, basically. So I think it would be more so an owner kind of gets it, right? I sign up a member, they get a metabolic assessment. I bring them in and I'm assessing their resting metabolism, and then I'm going to assess their movement deficiencies, let's say, and just use that data more effectively to drive in their wearable, but also to make them more successful to get to their training outcome, because I'm making it specific to them. So when they do come into my business, they know what to do on a treadmill, a bike, a Stairmaster, whatever choice that they're going to pick, and for how long. And the same thing goes for even weight training. So can you give us that overview of what would look like?
Yeah. Essentially, there are three different types of owner. There's the ones that want to offer the service to bring more clients in because it's very current. So they essentially are doing everything to get a VO2 max for them. And then there's the ones that want to lightly use the VO2 to also give zones and to kind of refine their training programs. And then there's a third type, which want to do deep dive analysis and want the test to drive all their training decisions for the individual. And they want to maximize the data. Companies are responding to this. KORR has a cardiac coach kiosk. It's a user-driven. It essentially is a bike, a Wahoo bike, in one of our devices where it's all touchscreen. You can go in, you buy a mask from the front desk, you put it on, it's all touchscreen. You do a test, and it'll give you your VO2 max. And there is clientele for that. You look at the longevity clinic, large hotel chains. Even if you looked at a military, for example, where they just want that data, they're not going to do anything with it. They're just, in the military's perspective, it's looking for a minimum score, right? And after 30 years in the Army, we do that. It drives me crazy. But there's that group there, and then there's the group, like you said, who want a few things like zones and stuff like that. So there's other devices. Like, we're one of the only company that has 4 different devices. well, 5 if you count the kiosks, because of the fact that we understand that the clinic owners have different reasons for owning. But part of the reason that when I talk to somebody who only wants basic information, within 5 minutes of talking to them, they had no idea that all this other information was available. And in
Yeah.
part, this is due to, I like yelling at people, but universities, for example, you get tested at a university, they do nothing with it. They take their outputs that came with the software and they hand it to the person and they say, here's your zones, and you're going, but that's not your zones. They're wrong. Did they use anaerobic threshold and percentages of that? Yes, they did. Are they right? No. They're accurate according to the formula, but they're not right for that person. And now there's such a big drive out there for zone specific training. 90% of
Don't go away
yeah.
from that. Further explain that. Further explain. Don't go away from that. I think why, if they did anaerobic threshold testing and you know the work that they were doing with the heart rate, why wasn't it specific?
Um because the fact that there was a formula that was developed that was easy based upon, a small group that was not divided by ethnicity and it wasn't divided by through a medical and general and athletic populations itself. So they're not applicable because of the fact that it depends on what method of anaerobic threshold you're looking at. And most people don't understand there are two different formulas for anaerobic threshold. There's ventilatory and metabolic. If you use metabolic on a person who actually has a good metabolism, it's going to shift everything to the right. But if their problem is respiratory, it'll be too far to the right to deal with their other systemic problem. So the thing that I hate the most is having a really nice device that measures everything accurately. Everybody cares whether it's been validated and whether it's accurate. Then they don't use. Then they look for the algorithm to
Yeah.
find one point and multiply it by a percentage. Well, why did you even care if it's accurate or not? If you're not going to use all the data, then what the hell are you doing?
Oh, the verbal
Yeah.
spanking.
Well,
Uh, yeah,
be
I
careful with
think,
new companies. Like I was, you know, and I can say this out loud. Calibra came out. Everybody that was in
yeah,
the industry knew that there's no way this thing works. They have now gone under. Now there's a bunch of people out there that own Calibras, which they dropped 400 on, that have no support, and they really had an inaccurate device that didn't do anything properly in the first place. And yes, you're going to have to invest in CPET into a good amount of money to be able to get accurate results, but you have a choice of what information you're willing to deal with, what you're willing to deal with, and what you're willing not to have. And it'll be really up to the individual to make a decision about, do I save for a little bit longer and get a device that has all the things that I want with it, or do I try and go nickel and dime and buy something crappy? And this is part of the reason why lactates become popular again, is because it costs almost nothing to buy a lactate meter. But they're paying a portion of money they should have saved for a CPAD because now they've got discontinuous systemic measurement. So they only have a measurement every minute if they're lucky and a guess of what's happening in
yeah.
between. And for anybody who's listening out there who's thinking of lactate, I defy you to find less than 10 different calculations for LT1. It's just an absolute joke. There is no LT1. There's LT2, and only because it's really obvious to find. And this is a guy who did lactate testing for 8 years. It could only accurately tell you one spot where lactate's accumulating rapidly. And again, it's
Yeah.
systemic. It's at the finger and the ear. How long ago did it happen at the muscle cell? And if you're testing every 1 minute, was it 5 seconds after the last one? Or was it where you are now? And there's no data in between. Everybody talks about. I had a guy come after me because of the fact that ventilatory data is quite various over time. And yeah, but I have data that I can average. You don't. you've got nothing.
Yeah. Continuous data versus episodic data. You're missing
Yeah.
a picture. You know, that's really the discussion I have with a lot of practitioners that do HRV testing episodically. And I'm like, yeah, I have continuous HRV. I have a trend. You have
Yes.
nothing. It's like it's like, come on. That's the biggest challenge. So you do this testing protocol. On average, what's the time for a
Thank.
test? And then once I collect that data and I dial in those intensities that we discussed, when should be the
Okay.
retest?
So I strongly recommend, and hopefully people are listening that are doing testing, 5 minute warm up. You must reach a homeostasis in order to know your baselines. If you start shooting off 1 minute increments right off the bat, you have no baseline. Plus, 90% of the time, you're going to miss fat max and you're going to miss crossover, which is the best method of determining zone 1 and zone 2. If you have fat and carbohydrate, if you have O2 and CO2. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter, you know, because the fact that you don't have the data that's necessary for making good decisions down there. So 5 minute warm up. I do a parameter check prior to each test because I need to be able to match the intensities to the individual. All my tests are between 9 and 12 minutes. So if they overestimate what they can do, it's 9 minutes. If they underestimate, it's 12. But it's always between 9 and 12. And then I do a 2 minute inactive recovery because I want to be able to look at heart rate recovery, CO2 expulsion, and a few other metrics afterwards itself. And frankly, I also look at volume of, like their tidal volume changes at rest. So there's a bunch of things I look for to make decisions. So if you look at the longest one, that would be 12 plus 5 plus 2. So 19 minutes. Is that too long yeah, it's not.
No, because if you're billing by minute, and you're trying to you're trying to lifetime value, engagement, most important number that you should be looking at, owners and operators, we know utilization. So if they can come there 10 to 12 visits. This is something that, I've implemented in the past, as a coach. I also have implemented it in businesses as a vendor provider using Polar in the past, using metabolic carts. And if you're an owner and you don't think you can make money on this, I know one franchise that was a customer of ours that did it $7 million
Yeah.
of business. It took time to get there, but within, it was over, let's say, a 5 year period of time. And the reason why I bring that up is because I think education is vital. And I think what you do with your courses is important to kind of discuss as the kind of like I want to jump to that because I think of a studio's thinking about adding metabolic testing. There's going to be some investment, but you're also giving a trainer a revenue opportunity to now bill for these testing services, and they can also then help build a training service, or to your point, a coaching or nutrition
Yep.
service, or even an endurance training
Yep.
program. So, what are some of those? Like, can you explain a little bit about your educational
Sure.
program?
If I can make one more comment, where most
Yeah, yeah.
people, you look at that 20 minutes, the 19 minutes, right? RMR takes 20 minutes if you decide to add that component. The analysis side
So,
is, this is
mhm.
where I understand people wanting quick analysis, right? And it all depends on the software that comes with the device. How easy is it to be able to interpret the data? And that's one thing I will give KORR credit for. They do a very good job of being able to get you can very easily make decisions in the software quickly. Then there's the review and application. So it's really important for owners to think of those three things as being separate. You can bang out a test in 20 minutes, yes. How long does it take you to kind of apply the data? And everybody wants it in the software, which essentially it is, depending on the degree that you wish to use all the information. And I tell people at the beginning, stick with the basics, and as you become more comfortable with it, then expand. Then use more of the data itself. It shouldn't take you longer than 30 minutes to explain their results and their programming for the next 8 to 12 weeks. Because one of the questions you asked me, how often should they test? 8 to 12 weeks after the first test, and then about 3 to 4 months after that. I tell business owners all the time, don't sell one test. The impressive part of what we do is show their first set of results against their second set of results. And yes, their outputs will be better. Like they can lift more, they can run faster, etc. But you can show how their physiology changed. You will need to rezone. This is what people don't realize. Your zones are not your zones. Your zones are specific to your physiology. If you've done your job well, your zones will improve. And by improve, I mean you're going to move to the right.
Move to the right.
Right on. And because then your zones have to change, and your prioritization of what you're going to go after next changes. When you do that and you show your clients that their training program is entirely tied to their test results, and they have confidence that their test results improved and their outcomes have changed, you've got them. So always package 2 or 3 a year. I prefer 3 a year, and let them save some money. Where you're also going to save money is the protocol for that person. You don't have to do it again. You can run the same protocol, and they start to understand what all the reports and data means, which means your 30-minute appointment goes down to 10 minutes by the third one. So try and work on an annual scale with this, not single tests. So that's my answer to that. My course. So I run a physiotherapy testing and programming course called PTAP. It's you can have a look at it on my website at Strategic Health and Performance. It's a 4-module killer course. It's really good. So the first module is just basic physiology related to metabolic testing. Then there's a testing module, an analysis module, and a programming module. It's very logically laid out.
Wow.
It's about 8 to 10 lessons of 40 to 60 minutes per module. So it's a lot of information.
It's basically a college course.
I've had PhDs in physiology take my course and went, that was amazing. You've explained this so much more in depth than I possibly learned in university.
I mean, I've known you for quite some time, as long as you've been almost practicing, because I sold you heart rate monitors when you were, I think, on the Olympic team. So I've enjoyed these conversations, and I've loved being able to share them, because I think I'm excited about the course curriculum. I definitely want to take it. For me, I think we're at a renaissance, because if the industry now is talking about zone 2 and talking about this, I think in VO2 testing, I think we're identifying now meaningful metrics, but I think people are putting the cart in front of the horse and not understanding that we need to have standard, and you need to ask these right questions. It's like, if I'm going to buy this equipment, besides asking, is it valid, and is it, do you have research? Because research, to your point, could be, I can cherry pick anything and say, hey, look, this is great. Standing on your head's the best type of thing, You also have to understand the cohort that you brought up. You were like, oh, it's not the population, it's not the right population, age, the specificity, the sensitivity of that, but also certain, like I'm not going to do a ramp protocol with grandma, it's also understanding what test you're going to implement on the level of the fitness of that individual. If they haven't worked out ever in a long time and they're just coming to you, you're not going to start them off at a high, starting them off on a proper ramp protocol is critical. I think that's where I think taking a course curriculum, understanding training, and then implementing this, and then I think personally, I think the gyms are missing out on an opportunity, but it's a bigger. I think it's a bigger problem. I am seeing though an adoption more of metabolic carts, but I'm also seeing it in the medical side, and I think that's something that we haven't even
I think
talked
it's
about enough
I think it's
because
crazy.
it's huge.
There's a big discussion going on in the UK. There are, was there 200 or 400 CEPs in all of UK? There's 6,000 in Australia. You know, yeah, it's just
Dang,
it's the NHS is completely overwhelmed
that's a
here,
huge difference.
um, and they know that exercise and nutrition are the two best ways to decrease or increase longevity and decrease medical conditions themselves. But they don't have the money to be able to send somebody in to see a CEP who could do physiological testing on them and give them an appropriate, individualized exercise and nutrition program. They're just basically told you need to eat better and exercise regularly. And you're hearing this and you're going, while you give him
Well,
statins and you give him other medications, and you're going, but you think you're decreasing the risk of stroke compared to exercise? We all know that's wrong. So I'm with you that until the medical community starts, embracing in the fact that you don't know and you don't have the capacity to give exercise. So bring us on board. If you had CEPs
yeah.
that had the ability to refer to programming in the community run by private gyms that follow the protocols, we could make a massive difference to illness in all over the world.
I agree. I think it's long overdue. The challenge is having the owner with the
Hmm.
right purpose. Um, that's the
They got
other
to make
problem that I'm
they got to
seeing
make money.
in business that we're talking about. Yeah, it's like everyone does, but like I had an owner that I really enjoyed talking about it. Owns a couple of facilities, and it's like there could be humane capitalism. There doesn't have to be you don't have to choose the dark side. You could, you know, um, be contribute in society. And I think this is a perfect opportunity also for a trainer to say, you know what, because we're talking about roughly, ten to fifteen thousand
Yep.
dollars of an investment that you need to be able to you could finance or you could decide to bet on yourself and how if you're charging let's say 350 a month already to your point if they're doing it if they have an annual agreement I can wrap this into my
Yep.
cost of goods sold that pays for
No.
itself and what it provides to me is data that I can go to that medical community and I can create a
Yep.
community type of initiative. And I think that's, I've seen that in certain states work really well, Minneapolis here, but I think it's because largely because of Lifetime I mentioned before was a big protagonist at that time of
Yep.
metabolic carts. And that was kind of
Yep.
the 90s and early 2000s was metabolic cart. I think that was kind of the
Yeah.
differentiator
Exos did that,
from a
right?
business
They were the
standpoint.
first. They were the first to bring
Yes.
in having metabolic carts within their facilities. Um, One of the things,
Yeah.
I work internationally doing data analysis and programming for people, and I this morning I just got off the phone with their guy, so the guy who's trying to learn everything, and essentially we meet once a week and we go through test results, and he's learning really well how to analyze the data and how to prescribe. Um, that's that's a company who really wants to embrace the best for their clients, and I think they're absolutely out. Can I say their name out loud?
Yeah, why not? Well, it's up if unless you have a
Aon,
specific
Aon
agreement,
or Ion,
you know.
Aeon, out of Atlanta. Stephen Burrows and his team is really embraced it. They invested in a metabolic cart, and their clients get tested on them. They try and do even all the correct zone training they implement, and that's it. Yes, it's a little more complicated, but they found ways of running group classes where everybody's doing, let's say, zone 5-1 intervals by simply, yeah, I know, I love it, and they're doing real ones. Yeah, uh,
Ouch, ouch. It's, it, you know, that must be. I would love to take a look, and I'm not surprised because typically it's in that environment that you see a
yeah.
lot of this best practice.
And
Um,
I could make people really
Before I let
happy
you
about
go,
something else
well,
too, because in addition to all this other stuff, I got together with Evan Pycon and Frank Kohler. And Evan's famous. He was the creator of NOx, a infrared spectroscopy device. He was also one of the head guys behind the science behind Moxie, which I use as well. So I use Moxie and Train Red. A shout out to both of those guys, because I use near
great
infrared
products.
spectroscopy as part of my testing. And if you take my course, the advanced level shows how to implement other devices into the testing itself. um, and what we're doing is Evan, besides being extremely knowledgeable on near infrared spectroscopy and physiology, but he has a PhD in biological science, so he's our math whiz and stats whiz. So they've taken,
Oh wow,
yeah,
he's a
and
really smart
I've
guy. With the Knox product, I like what he's done too. Unfortunate. That's interesting. That industry's kind of picked up again. The continuous blood blood oxygen measurement is a really
It is. Well,
untapped
Human
market.
came out, right, and then died. Moxie's been the longest kicker, and they're a wonderful company owned by a wonderful man that I've known since it started. And
And they've
yes,
done it through education. That's what we're talking about, you know. It's I think, you know, education. I know it's a term that I've used often, edu-selling, you know, because I think if you talk about the why and the what and the how, you can really create uh, it's true training, right?
yeah,
Or are you exercising? And I think everyone exercises,
right.
but no one's really training.
Well, that question about
And
effective and efficient access to outcomes. So Frank is out of Poland, and he's an IT expert, and he has some high level kids in sport and a strong love of physiology. We created Assess.Works, and that has the ability to import any of your physiological data. And I'm talking lactate, CPET, near infrared spectroscopy, etc., into a platform which makes it really easy to access the data. We're now creating the second phase, which is the analysis, the automatic analysis, but it's not, it's done using my theories. So it's everything that I've learned over 30 years built in and identified. So you'll end up with primary, secondary, and tertiary limitations based upon, and you'll end up with scoring for all those individual components within each of those systems, as well as outputs. So, of course, outputs are really important as well. The third phase is actually prescription. So it's actually all the programming associated. And clients are going to have the ability to be able to press one button, two button, three buttons. So they have a choice. If they want a really in-depth report with recommendations, they can have that. If they want the interpretation and then design their own programming, they have that. If they just want to be able to look at their data and do everything themselves, they have that. None of it's BS. So I'm not going to tell you that you can find, a VO2 max from lactate. You can't. I will tell you how it contributes to decisions. But we've even developed what we refer to as continuous zoning, because we know that zones don't happen at one heart rate. But our system actually can be able to see where intensity changes are happening over time using 18 different metrics if they're available. So, in other words, and not only that, but it'll give you the confidence intervals for each of the zones. So, yes, if you ask me to zone lactate,
Wow.
we'll give you zones, but the confidence intervals will be about this far apart. And the more information and the more specific, starting with CPET with O2 and CO2 as being the major contributors. So they should be. That's the most important data that you get. But if you throw NIRS in there with it, it starts using the NIRS data as part of the calculation as well. And it does it all automatically. And I have to thank Frank.
And it could be a good
Yeah,
proxy with heart rate, right? That's so those are the two. Yeah, I think that's where like that's what excites me the most of where we're getting to from a tech standpoint. Um, it- and to your point, if you're going to spend 500 bucks on something that's supposed to kind of do that, but a Moxie's not that much more. I think it's a great investment. I, I a lot of people use it predominantly for testing. I've seen endurance athletes use it for testing and
yeah,
training in the way you're describing, because tomorrow I might be utilizing fuel a little bit more efficiently, so that naturally drifts those numbers to the right, right? Because those your point is those numbers are always going to drift based on your level of recovery, your level of fitness that day, the stress level of that day. It varies because that's homeostasis, right? It's up and down, up and down. So taking those numbers as accurate as possible helps us, and especially if throughout your training cycle, just makes it more efficient.
yeah.
Makes it
And,
more
and I'm a firm
surgical.
believer. I'm
Uh,
one of the people out there that says you test in a lab situation. You do not strap a ton of stuff on people when they're training. Leave them the frig alone and use heart rate. Because if you've slept poorly, had a fight with your spouse, eaten poorly, all of these things will affect your heart rate. Temperature outside, wind, uh,
yeah.
all that stuff will affect your heart rate. If you use wattage, none of that's affected. Wattage is wattage. It doesn't take into account that it's 104 degrees and the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour in your face. Your body does. So pay attention to freaking heart rates. Stop strapping people up with stuff and quit taking lactates on people intermittently during a ride. The pro cycling teams need to get a grip on this, and I blame the Norwegians for bringing this back in. It's absolutely it's a bunch of coaches that want to play science, and nobody who's a scientist would ever tell you this is the right way of doing things. So I really like the fact that all you should have on you is a heart rate strap, and that is it. And if you want to look at
Yeah.
your outputs at the end of the day, so you should, to see how well you're performing at the same stress levels, because your heart rate, you paid attention to your heart rate. Yes, by all means, pay attention to that. It's important information. Race day is going to be like that temperature. You've got all this information that nobody
Yeah.
applies at all, and it drives me crazy.
I also think you got to look at trends and not be so day to day. That's the other variable here. And all of a sudden, people are labeling it like a specific syndrome that the
Yeah,
data impacts your behavior. No duh, but also no one's educating them about what the number really means, and over a period of time is what really
yeah,
matters. But you need to measure, and now that there's plenty of data out there, I think the opportunity is really out there for people to help
I
get their
I
training
I had a
outcomes.
guy who called
So I
yesterday,
want,
and you'll like the story. He says, I think that there's something wrong with me. I'm trying to do my workouts that are prescribed to me by my cycling coach, and I can't hit the numbers he's asking me to hit. I said, "How old are you?" And he said, "Well, you're 66. How many times per week are you working out?" Six. And I go, are you trying to
Dang.
join the
No
tour or what?
recovery.
I said, what are you using for zoning? And he said, oh, I went down to our local university and had CPET and lactate done. I said, great, can you send me the report? All the zoning was based on lactate. They did not use any of the CPET data. So don't think that universities know what they're doing, because they don't. And then he
No.
said his question to me was not querying whether the program's too much or whether his zones are right. Should I get a blood test? And I said, yeah, if you want to affirm that you're fatigued, it'll show that. What are you going to do about it? And this is the problem with testing, is sort of like,
Yeah.
God, if there's no answer to the result of the test that you are going to apply, why test it?
So there's two situations going on there. One is medical professionals are dropping the ball and not educating, and to your point, are pushing medication. The other aspect is they're not really making sense of just because it's available. Why am I going to buy a blood test? Why am I going to? Because am I playing like I'm playing doctor more or less now. We're giving that ability to everyone through internet searches and through influencers. There is a lack of a filter lack, as well as just kind of a thought
Yep.
process to be a critical
Well,
thinker is
people will
kind of
go out and
missing.
now get genetic
Yeah.
testing and get exercise program based. I said, what do you plan on going back and killing your mother? Because you can't. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, and you're not going to be able to change anything to do with that. You did the wrong tests. For God's sakes, get a ramp test done with a CPET, with O2 and CO2, and for God's sakes, talk to somebody that knows what to do with the data. There's way too many people out there with gear
Yeah.
and not a clue, because they saw it as a way of making money only,
Are,
not a way of influencing their exercise and nutrition prescription and doing the best they can for their clients. So for customers out there that want tests, please investigate. What do you get for analysis, and what do you get for exercise prescription as well? And find out what gear they're using. Find somebody else. If they have O2 only testing, find somebody else that has O2 and CO2.
yeah. I think those three things are the perfect questions that an owner should be asking. Because I think at the end of the day, I think a lot of good information here has been shared. I think there's been a good outcome that they could all adopt
Absolutely.
if they want to reach out to you. What are the best emails? I'll put the two websites into the comments, but the best way to get
Well,
a
if
hold
you
of
go,
you
yeah,
is
you can
through
get me through
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn, but you can also just go to my website and book a complimentary session as well. Or you can write to me directly at strategichap@icloud.com. So it's strategic health and performance, but I couldn't fit it all in one email. So strategichap@icloud.com is another good way of getting a hold of me. And don't worry, I work internationally. I'm Canadian. Yes, I'm in the UK, but I work internationally, so there's no borders to me.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, Daniel. And
Me
I'm
too. I
I'm
wonder
looking
what it's going to
forward to the
be.
next one.